Hey everybody, I'm Jeanette, a self-professed true crime nerd, and welcome to the Law and Murder Podcast, where we're going to be talking about true crime and exonerations. You ready? Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I hope you guys had a really good week. I'm just going to tell you right now that instead of taking a break and doing all that stuff, I'm going to keep giving you episodes. Just subscribe. If you subscribe, they come automatically. And then you don't have to worry about when I drop an episode. It'll just be in your feed whenever you're ready to listen to it. That's really all I can promise you. You're going to get an episode every week. I just don't know what day of the week that is going to be. So, here we go. I kind of wanted to start with a little story to kind of get into today's episode so that you guys have an idea of kind of where I get some of my ideas from. So, I really didn't understand how interesting and intriguing true crime truly is to so many other people. The whole podcasting experience happened because I was at work and I was talking about that show Mindhunter on Netflix. Because even though I'm a true crime nerd, I never followed serial killers. I just watched shows on the ID channel and read the great books by Anne Rule. So when I saw Mindhunter, I really had an interest in Ed Kemper, and from that interest stemmed the Golden State Killer, and I think I came across him from a true crime podcast called Criminology or something like that. It's really good. I can't remember though, but then I bought the book. I forget the name of the book, but the one by Michelle McNamara. I think that's the only book she's written, so you're pretty safe to go ahead and search that one. It kind of just took off from there. Anyway, I was in the office talking about serial killers and Mindhunter, and all these people in my shop almost crowded around, and there was just a true crime open discussion. It happened often where we would just gather around and talk all about true crime shows, what we had saw on television, or a certain book or podcast that we listened to. In one particular conversation, a friend and I were talking about Serial because, if you're going to get introduced to a podcast, Serial is going to be the one to grab you into the podcasting world. I have introduced so many people into the gateway of podcasting through Serial. So, anyway, we were at work having a debate about who did it, Adnan or Jay or someone else, but then it went into a discussion about the Colonial Parkway murders, and one of the chicks in my office was like, why don't you start a podcast? And I was like, why don't I start a podcast? And that is how Law and Murder was born. I'm getting to a point here, I promise. So, last week, I was upstairs taking care of some stuff in my office, and I had another friend who's a podcaster. He has the show Fellow Nerds, if you're interested in gaming and stuff like that. That's two of my buddies. They're doing their own podcast. They're doing their thing. And there's this new guy at work, and we were all talking about podcasting, and the guys upstairs told him about my podcast, and he was the one that gave me the case for this week. He told me to look up Albert Fish, and that I would definitely be fascinated by his story. So, of course, I came home, and I'm definitely creeped out, totally weirded out by Mr. Fish. And that's how today's case was born. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do like the show, please rate it. And for my commenters on YouTube, hi! For everybody who left a review on iTunes, thank you. I really appreciate it. So today we're going to go way back to the early 1900s. I never thought I'd be interested in a case from way back in the day, but Albert Fish was a very, very dynamic person. You may have known him as the Brooklyn Vampire or the Gray Man, which is not how I'm going to refer to him today. I'm going to call him by his name. Fish was born to a family that was plagued with mental illness. His brother lived his life in a mental hospital. His uncle suffered from mania, and his mother had suffered from hallucinations, which can probably be attributed to schizophrenia. Because of all of this, he was raised in an orphanage in Washington, D.C. until he was 18. When he turned 18, he moved from D.C. to New York City, and this is where the long criminal history of Fish begins. He started in New York raping little boys. Things seemed to calm down for him a little bit, and his mother had gotten him after he had gotten out of the orphanage and arranged a marriage for Fish to a 19-year-old girl. During the course of their marriage, they would have 6 children, and it would appear that he settled down and began to work as a house painter to make ends meet. I mean, 6 kids is a lot. I don't care who you are, and you have to support them somehow, right? So having a family and working to take care of them, though, didn't quell his insane desires because he was still molesting boys during this time. Fish stayed married until about 1917 when his wife left him for another man, and she left him with the kids. I mean, that's a little savage, right? And this is where things seriously just clicked into the danger zone and where he began to escalate. It seems that he couldn't handle the fact that his wife left him. I couldn't find anywhere that says why they divorced. I mean, this was a really long time ago, but he got left by his wife and things just went from bad to worse. In 1919, he stabbed a little boy who was disabled. In 1924, he tried to lure a girl to him. And when the little girl was going to him, her mother made a scene and chased Fish away. And he later went back to the girl's home and hung out like in her yard or in her barn or something. And the girl's father noticed that someone was out there, and he found Fish hiding and kicked him off of the farm. So he finally left her alone and moved on. Albert Fish had also started getting into self-mutilation for what I can only think was his way to get away from the stress of being left, his inner demons, and raising 6 children. His son is reported to say that his dad was really weird and he knew that he would most likely get into trouble or end up at a mental institution because of his weird ways. His son says that he had witnessed his father eating raw meat and talks about how his dad made the kids mutilate him, or they would walk into him mutilating himself. One of the strangest things to date, I think, is that this guy would insert needles inside his pelvis. And later on, like after all of this is said and done, and he was in prison, an x-ray had been done and found that he had 29 metal needles inside of his pelvis, which is absolutely insane. I mean, I stub my toe and I'm done. Like, I'm cussing. Like, no, I'm not going to stick needles in me. That's just crazy. But this guy did not fear pain and almost went to any length just to feel. Things seemed to have quieted for Fish for a little while, but he escalated again. He was said to have several homosexual relationships during his life. I can't really confirm that completely, but there was one guy that he dated that was said to have been a bit mentally disabled. During the course of their relationship, Fish had a deep-seated desire to torture his then boyfriend. He got him to go to a barn house with him, and when they got there, Fish tied him up and tortured him for 2 weeks. It's unknown what he truly did to him, but he tells police later that he had bound him up and tortured him, and what he really wanted to do was kill him, but since it was hot, he didn't do it for the fear of getting caught due to the decomp. Instead of leaving and moving on, he had this really big fascination with castration. So he cut the boy's penis, and after he did, he cleansed the wound, left $10 on the floor for his troubles, and got on a train and left the boy there to suffer. It's quoted that he told the police after he got caught, after all of his shenanigans, that he said, I quote, "I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me." He admitted to wanting to kill the boy, but he told the police that he knew that the body would be found because it was too hot and the smell would totally give him away, so he let the boy live. Nothing was satisfying this guy's desires, and again, he got worse. I mean, if anyone was truly mentally ill, it was definitely this guy. He had to find a way to satiate his needs, and these needs, of course, escalated. and he had started gaining a big interest in cannibalism. So to satiate that need until he could find his next victim, he would eat raw meat often, like his son had said before. While this need got more and more undeniable, he must have figured that luring the girl while her mother was around didn't work, so he concocted another plan. Fish lived on a farm and was still painting houses, so he thought that having people come to him would be the way to get his victims without having to worry about anyone stopping him. His idea was to put an ad in the newspaper for a male that was over 18 that was willing to help out with hard labor on his farm. A guy named Bud saw the ad in the paper and thought that it would be a good gig for him, so he answered the ad and asked if his friend Willie could join on the job. Fish didn't have a problem with it, and they made arrangements for Fish to pick them up and take them to the farm. Fish was super delighted that someone had answered his ad, and now he had 2 victims. A few days later, when Fish was scheduled to go and get them, he sent a telegram that he wasn't going to be able to make it on the day that they had originally agreed to, but that he would come back another day to get them. On the day that he rescheduled, Fish came by to get them, but he saw Bud's sister Gracie playing around. His initial intention was to take the boys and kill them, but he was instantly attracted to Gracie, and he changed his mind. He had to have Gracie, and he had to get the boys distracted or come up with some kind of plan to let her go. So while he was chatting with the guys, he told them that he had to go to a birthday party for his kids. He had seen Gracie, and of course, the most perfect plan was to invite her to the birthday party, so he asked her parents if he could take her, and they allowed her to go. She was supposed to be back at 9 o'clock in the evening, and Gracie was never going to come back to that home, and she was never going to be found again. Her parents waited until 9, and that passed, then 10 o'clock passed, and the anxiety and the realization that their daughter wasn't coming back absolutely killed them. Gracie's parents called the police, and together they created a widespread search for Gracie. They put her picture on the front page of the newspaper with the details of the day that she went missing, but no one had any information that they could offer to the police. The family had also made search parties to look for her to see if maybe she had gotten hurt in the woods, to no avail. The police also had no leads because Fish was working under the alias of Frank Howard. The case would go cold with no information about Frank Howard or Gracie, and it wouldn't come for years. Bill Gaffney, who was 4 years old, was outside playing with his friend, who was also named Bill, and he was 3. Gaffney's older brother was watching them and got distracted. He went inside for a minute, and Fish took this as his opportunity to lure both of the boys. He got both of the boys to come with him into the woods, and a neighbor would describe seeing a man who looked just like the gray man. His skin looked gray, his hair was gray, just everything about him was gray. And somehow, by a pure miracle, the 3-year-old Billy boy came back, and when he did, and when he was asked who took the older Billy, baby Billy said that the boogeyman had taken him. A search was conducted in the woods, but Billy's body would never be recovered. Both the murder of Billy Gaffney and Gracie both happened within a year of each other. Gracie was found missing in 1928, and Billy Gaffney would go missing in 1929. And it wouldn't be until 5 years later that Fish would take his next victim. This would be the final victim that was tied to Albert Fish. Francis, a 9-year-old boy, was outside playing catch with his friends in a field. Fish had been seen around the area and somehow managed to get Francis to follow him into the woods. His friends would later say that they saw him walking with an old man, but they didn't think anything of it. His family had also conducted a search, and what they found was the most gruesome thing anyone should have to see. Francis was found in the woods. Some places that I researched say that he was hanging from a tree, and others say that he was found under some branches. But when he was found, he had been severely mutilated, and was strangled with his own suspenders. 6 years after the disappearance of Gracie and the murders of the 2 boys, Gracie's family had received a letter in the mail from Frank Howard. In that note, he told the family about the murder, and here's what the note said. Dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold to butchers to be cut up and sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for a steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out, and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body, sold as veal cutlet, bought the highest price. John stayed there so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times a day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. He first killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest booty and, of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his rear end, boiled, broiled, fried, and stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At the time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street, rear right side. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I called you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Gracie sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me undressed, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her, and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I choked her to death and cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook it, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little rear end roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not have sex with her, though I could have. She died a virgin. Ugh. I kind of didn't read the whole thing, like when I was getting it ready for the podcast, and wow, that was, I felt so uncomfortable reading that, but that's really what he wrote. I mean, minus the curse words, because I'm trying to keep it clean, but, golly, this guy was an animal. Wow. So that's what Albert Fish had written to the mother. The family gave the police the note, and the police had asked again about this Frank Howard guy. They got a description of the guy, and still the police had not connected Frank Howard and Albert Fish. There was something curious on the note that Fish had given the family. There was an emblem that was stationery of the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. The police went right there to see if they could connect that stationery to their killer. And upon further investigation, they found a janitor in the building that had admitted to taking the paper to a place where he was staying, but that he moved out and didn't take the paper with him, so it may have come from there. The police at this point had nothing to lose, so they went to the rooming house that the janitor stayed in, and the landlord had told the police that a guy named Albert Fish was living in the home last, and he moved out, but he had mentioned that his son was going to send him some money and that he would be back in a few days to get it. So the police told her to stay there because they needed to see him for questioning, and they were going to stake out the place and wait for him to come by. She agreed and waited for Fish to stop by and pick up the envelope. He had no idea what is going on, and of course, he comes back to get the envelope, and the police grab him right there and take him into questioning. While he was being questioned, he told the police everything about Gracie and what he did, and even included that in his initial plan, he was going to take the brother, but changed his mind. He was arrested right away and taken to trial. During the trial, he pleaded that he was insane and should go to a mental hospital. During the trial, he had several psychiatrists that would evaluate him. He had many sexual fetishes and abnormalities that it was seriously shocking how not okay this man was. He was also said to be abnormal but sane because he knew right from wrong. There was no denying that this guy had some serious problems and didn't belong in the streets. The trial lasted 10 days, and the jury knew that Albert Fish was indeed insane, but they didn't want him anywhere. So to make sure that he would never come out, the jury found him sane and guilty. In March of 1935, he was sentenced to death, and not even a year later, in January of 1936, he was executed by electric chair. While he was in jail for that short period of time, Gracie's mother came to the prison to ask Fish why he did what he did to their daughter, but he started crying and refused to answer, and Gracie's mother never got closure when it came to a why. Once he was electrocuted, his lawyer had come out to the public and said that he was in possession of a 45-page note describing his innermost thoughts. His lawyer was absolutely disgusted by this man and said that he would never, ever show it to anyone because it was just filth. And that, my friends, is the story of Albert Fish. He is probably the most gruesome killer that I've researched to date, and I'm sure that there are more, but he falls into that Ed Gein, Jeffrey Dahmer type killer, and mental illness was definitely real for this guy. I also know that I had a little bit of judgment when it came to Gracie's mom, but I also had to remember that the times were different, and to them he may have seemed like a trustworthy guy because he was going to employ their kid. Maybe he hung out with them for longer. I didn't really get much from how well the family knew them, so I kind of had to check myself because you never really know with these things. But I did learn to always make sure to communicate with my kids, that they don't talk to strangers, and run the hell away if they feel any type of danger. And always to call us on our phones or walkie-talkies so we have constant communication with our kids. Each one of these crimes that I'm telling you about and the exonerations have totally taught me something in staying safe and keeping guard for my life and my kids' life. And I hope that you're learning something too. Until next week, crime nerds, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I think I have a couple of things that I kind of want to do, so stay tuned. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and if you love the show, please leave a review on iTunes, and it would be even better if you shared it with your friends and got the word out. Until next time, bye.